afternoon, everybody, and welcome for joining us at this PPMA webinar. Nice to see lots of people with us today. I'm Marie Metham, and I'm from Lincolnshire County Council, and I'm one of the strategic HR business partners there, and I'm also a member of the PPMA Extended Management Board, and I'm your host for the webinar this afternoon. So you'll probably be aware this is one of a series of webinars that PPMA bring you, always on thought-provoking topics from a wide variety of speakers. And today we're delighted to be joined by several colleagues, Rachael Morris and Matthew Jones from Penna, and also Dawn Matthews and Andy Dodman. And they're going to be taking us through our session today on mastering the path to HR leadership. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we start. The session is being recorded today, which just means anyone who can't join us can catch up with it afterwards on the PPMA website. So don't worry about the fact it's being recording. It'll just be me and the presenter who'll be visible. So you can keep your cameras on if you prefer to. That's entirely your choice. So if I could ask you, though, to turn your microphones off during the presentation, we will have opportunity for questions at the end. And by all means, put questions in the chat if you think of anything as we're going through. Really welcome you doing that. So I'm really looking forward to today's session, and Rachel and Matthew, over to you.
Thanks, Marie, and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar, which I'm delighted to facilitate with my colleague Rachael Morris. Very quick intros to us. So my name is Matt Jones, and I am a senior consultant in the executive interim practice at Penna and the HR interim lead at Penna. I've been with the organisation for 8 years or so, and over that time I've seen the role of HR&OD play a significant role in public sector transformation. Rachael is a senior consultant in our executive search practice and our HR executive search lead. She's been with Penna for just over a year now, but prior to that spent 20 years in local government, working recently as a strategic HRBP in Nottingham City Council. I'll hand over to her shortly, and she'll lead us through the second part of today. We at Penna are also delighted to be a premier sponsor of the PPMA and are very much looking forward to next week's conference, which Rachael will come on to talk about in a little bit later. So as Marie said, today's topic is titled Getting Ready for the HRD Top Job. And we have two fantastic guest speakers who will be sharing their career journeys and what that has looked like. As Marie mentioned, we have around 30 to 45 minutes today. And as always, hopefully there's a time for a Q&A. So do feel free to pop any questions or thoughts in the chat box, and we can hopefully look to raise those if we have time. So we wanted to bring two people onto this webinar who are at different stages of their careers. So I'm delighted to welcome Dawn Matthews and Andy Dodman. Dawn is the head of HR Shared and Trade Services at Sutton and Kingston Councils. She is a senior HR professional with an extensive career in local government, spanning the entire HR portfolio. She completed the PPMA Peer into the Future programme last year as well, and is really looking forward to stepping up into an HRD role. Also joining us is Andy Dodman, who is currently the Chief HR Officer at Leeds City Council, where he has been since 2019. Prior to joining Leeds, Andy spent several years with the University of Sheffield as their HR Director and latterly Chief Operating Officer. Andy also currently sits on the board of PPMA. So welcome to you both. And we'll be exploring some key topics today, but I thought I'd start with a nice, very open question to you both. Perhaps Andy, if we start with you first, if we're looking at resilience and talking about that, and perhaps challenges you might have faced along the way, how do you get ahead in HR&OD? And please feel free to elaborate on my very brief intro to you and your career.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, Matt. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody is well. So yeah, as Matt said, I'm the Chief HR Officer at Leeds. Just so people know, it's as you would expect, it's a really big local authority, second biggest in the country. So my responsibility is to cover about 14,500 staff that we directly employ, and about another 11,000 in our schools. Just in terms of how do I get ahead in HR, and I guess a bit more, Matt, about my journey. I suppose what I would say before we bring Dawn in is you often hear people, don't you, about sort of drifting into HR and they sort of just found themselves into that career and then they progress. I guess I'm the exact opposite to that. So I'm your good old-fashioned HR nerd. I did make a conscious decision when I was probably at 16, 17 that I wanted to work in HR, and I wanted to be an HR&D. Don't ask me why, but I just made that decision. And I think all my career journey thereafter was determined on that trajectory. So my decisions, in terms of A levels, universities, employment, were based around that progression. So I guess for me, it was that sort of sense of determination and ambition to work through that HR journey. And my route has been quite a traditional HR route. So, starting actually when I started was personnel. That shows you how old I am. Personnel assistant, and then work through up all the different routes. And first became an HR&D probably about sort of 14, 15 years ago. I think in terms of my reflections, I guess probably one of the key things I would say is for colleagues to think about the depth and the breadth of their career and the work that they are focused on. So I think there's certainly something, Matt, about really understanding the depth of HR work and expertise. So I think my sense as an HR leader is that you really do need to be able to know how to do your hiring and particularly your firing. You do need to know how to train, to induct staff, to restructure services, to negotiate with the trade unions, to do your OD work, to become that sort of real HR expert. So you do need to know your technical stuff. I think that is a key issue in your career, making sure you're working through that and ticking those boxes. But as well as the depth, I think the key thing is the breadth as well. So looking across. So I think there is that there is something here about that willingness, the ability to understand the broader organization requirements. So to understand how an organization works, its finances, its IT, its service delivery, its operations. So it's not just being a technical expert, but it's also understanding that sort of broader piece. And I think from my experience, working in sort of large, complex organizations helps you with the breadth as well, because you have that ability to really cut across and really understand all that sort of complexity, whether certain local government, political complexity, as well as sort of size and depth. Final thing I would say just before, I'm sure, Dawn, you will add to everything I've said, is just something about purpose. I think it does make a big difference in my experience about really thinking about the type of organization you're working in. And some organizations I've worked in is if you're not convinced about the purpose, about the common good, about the outcomes of whatever organization you're working in, I think that can have a detrimental impact. So what I would say is certainly think very much about aligning your own values, your own goals with that of the organization. Because if they are aligned, then you have that real sort of sense of commitment, that drive, that enthusiasm, that passion to really do what's best for the organization and best for the greater good. And if they don't align, maybe time to move on and do something different. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. Before we come to you, Dawn, I just thought I'd just pick up on one of your points, Andy, around I suppose that defining point really in your career, in your life when you thought HR&D, that's me, that's what I want to do. I mean, was it a light bulb moment for you, do you think, or was it someone you looked up to that you thought, yeah, I can do that, or that's that's aspiring, I would like to get there? Talk us through a little bit more about that.
It's hard to answer because I'm not because I was so young at the time. I guess what it was when doing, I mean, as you are when you're young, sort of you're doing your sort of Saturday jobs, and I was doing Saturday jobs in I think it was Marks and Spencer in the centre of Leeds, and you do all your stacking your shelves. And at the time, I was watching the personnel officers do their stuff, thinking, well, that's more interesting than what I was doing. So you do the issue about you putting your hand up and say, can I just watch what they do? And at the end of the summer job, I was able to spend a couple of days shadowing the personnel officer. And it just had that whole variety of engagement. And I think probably, Matt, it was the unknown, because you're dealing with people on a day-to-day, and people do strange things, don't they? So it's the thing of not the repetition. It was the ability to every day is completely different, completely fresh. And also, I guess the light bulb moment is you're never quite sure what the answer is. So I think the skill for the HR person was you have to use your judgment, and go with that, rather than here's a rule book, just follow the rules.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. That's really interesting. And Dawn, if we come to you now, and I suppose the same question from your experience, how do you get ahead in HR, and perhaps what do those barriers look like to you?
Okay, thanks, Matt. So a bit like Andy, really, I started in the field when it was called personnel as well. And I started as an HR assistant. But unlike Andy, I never really had that ambition to be an HRD or anything like that. So I would say if you look at ambition in a conventional way, that wasn't me. But what I did do is I worked very hard and kind of worked my way up through the ranks to get to where I am today. So as you've already said, Matt, I'm currently the head of HR Shared and Traded Services, and I look after both Sutton and Kingston councils. So in terms of scale, not as large as Leeds, it's about 2,500 employees. But the complexity of working across two boroughs is not to be sniffed at. I think for me, throughout my career, I've literally, when I'm doing a role, what I've done is I've kind of thought, actually, I'm tired of this now. I can do it with my eyes closed. What's the next challenge? Sometimes that challenge has been climbing up to another level. Sometimes it's been doing a sideways move to a larger organization where the breadth is expanded and I can learn that way. If I think about my light bulb moment, I was doing a degree in business administration many moons ago, and one of the modules was human resource management, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. So in my second year, I switched to a BA in human resource management, and I think it aligns with my values because I'm naturally a people person. Very empathetic, very curious, and really like to kind of support and help people. I mean, I sort of naturally coach members of my team and even friends and family. So it really aligns with what I like doing, my purpose and my values. In terms of kind of, I guess, some of the barriers, I think working in HR, you need to be very resilient. Definitely being resilient is absolutely number one. I think I'm going to echo what Andy says, is you actually need to have a passion for the role. So I don't do it because it's a job and it's something to do. I do it because I'm really invested. I've worked really hard to get to the head of service level. I completed the PMA, Peer into the Future course, 2022-23, which was really insightful. We had some amazing speakers that came and shared like their experiences and their journeys within the HR profession. And I think having that exposure to that platform really helped me to kind of see, actually, I probably can be an HRD one day. So, that's kind of where my career has naturally taken me. It's been a bit of an organic progression rather than an intentional progression, but one that I'm really pleased with and really enjoyed nonetheless. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, really interesting. And I think, yeah, you're right. And we'll come on to talk about networks in a bit and how we can utilize those to really help with career advancement. But the next point, I suppose, and naturally, Rachel and I will have some views and opinions on this being recruiters. But I'd like to hear from you both first on where and how you think executive recruiters like Penna can help with career advancement. Dawn, can we come back to you on that?
Yeah, sure. I think that recruiters can help with career advancement in terms of, I guess, helping us, keeping in contact with us, or us keeping in contact with each other. Because I do think it needs to be a two-way thing. So I'm not putting it all in the recruiters. But in terms of intel and like what's happening in the profession, what's happening kind of, across the horizon. Because as busy HR professionals, especially as you're climbing the ladder and you're looking at things from a kind of strategic view, you're not able always to carve out the time to do that for yourself. So kind of those sort of insights, I think webinars like this are really, really helpful. I also think having those conversations about, what are your career aspirations? and kind of speaking to recruiters about that. They have a lot of connections across the piece, and they can probably help to advise and guide and share some intel about what's coming up in terms of roles that you may be suitable for. You know, I mean, for example, myself working in 2 small outer London boroughs, although I have worked in inner London boroughs before, you know, it might not be feasible to try and go to a really large council like, you know, Leeds or another large local council. So recruiters can kind of help as well to put some of that into perspective for you. So I think there's something about kind of keeping in touch with us, or with each other, I should say, and just letting us know what's happening in the market, where the movement is, what might be coming up, and also, you know, some things that we may be able to do to prepare ourselves for that next role. So sessions such as this, for example.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely, I would argue, the honesty aspect that we can provide, and kind of being kind of upfront with you about, you know, where we think and where we know we can help. And Andy, if I come to you now on the same question, and your experience, how have recruiters helped?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely mirror what Dawn said. I mean, she's absolutely right. I mean, I think it's also that insight very much into different sectors that you as an employer may be less familiar with. So you may be able to navigate, you know, around your own area, you know, whether that's, say, local government or public sector. But recruiters, Penna of organisation will have insights elsewhere. So what does the labour market look like? So you get that sense of sort of the depth and the breadth that I mentioned earlier. You know, so that greater insight. But I think it's also something about looking at sort of in-demand skills. So recruiters are very good at recognising where the skills gaps are, but equally, you know, where the right people are to plug those gaps. And that can be sort of from the internal facing and then reflecting on your own team and where the gaps might be compared to where the labour market is going. But equally supporting, obviously, you to plug your own gaps, because you'll be linked into that labour market. So something about sectors and skills, I think, for me, has been really, really powerful.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd echo a lot of that. And as I mentioned about networks, and I think in addition to us as recruiters, you know, definitely recommend utilising your own networks. You know, you've got the CIPD, of course, the PPMA, and they're fantastic talent programs. You've got One to Watch, HR Rising Star, Peer into the Future. You've also got the a sales clearly, and, you know, having one or you know, or knowing of a few in your network can massively support career development. You know, we can help open doors, and echoing a lot of what Dawn and Andy have said, you know, we do have strong relationships across the market. It might be CV tips, it might be interview guidance, it could be intelligence on a particular client for a role that you're applying for or thinking about. You know, we're here to help and be completely honest with you on how we can support that and support your career development. Rachel, did you want to come in now and I suppose add anything to that point, being a recruiter now for the last year?
Yeah, gamekeeper turned poacher, I think is the analogy. So I think, you know, the way that I look at that, I think, is I've been on your side of the fence in a local authority. I haven't worked in the wider public sector, but I've been a strategic HR BP reporting into a director, and I was really questioning whether I really loved HR, I think, at the point where I decided to move on and do something different, because it was really tough in the authority I was working for, and the role was extremely broad, and there was lots of other stuff going on for me. But I think some of that development conversation was really hard to have. You know, I think HR professionals are really busy doing the job, and I think actually sometimes giving yourself that breathing space to think about what it is that you want, not necessarily what your clients or your internal departments want from you as a HR professional, because we can be very reactive, is my experience. And sometimes being strategic and like sticking your head above the clouds is really hard to do as a professional, let alone think about your own career development. The thing I'd like to reflect back, and some of you may feel like this, is obviously you will get approached by recruiters all the time. You might not get, depending on where you are in your career, you might not get approached by executive search recruiters or executive interim recruiters at the level that you might be at. And I don't think I saw an awful lot of that happening for me as a strategic BP, although the next level up for me was head of service, which me feels like it's in exec search territory, and Matt's nodding. I would think, don't be scared by the fact that recruiters aren't necessarily contacting you. and almost take the hidden almost and go out there and grab them. And I definitely would say speak to any recruiter. You'll get something slightly different, I think, from the executive search space, which is obviously where Penna, myself and Matt operate in. And we are here to support you. You know, we've got really busy roles too, but actually part of our role is working with clients, but a massive part of that is where are tomorrow's talent? Where are today's talent? And if we don't know you, then that's something on us, but definitely there's something on you to reach out. So what I would say is, you know, if you're at that kind of more strategic BP level, think about actually getting in touch with your executive search recruiter like Penna, and have a conversation with us, because we can share insights as Andy and Dawn have shared, but we can also give you a bit of coaching and a bit of support. And sometimes you don't often get that as a HRBP. You're fixing everybody else's problems, or you're putting out all the fires. And I really struggled to think about my own career development, but there was an expectation that I knew. So I think allowing a recruiter who's completely, you know, with loads of experience, but outside your sector, to be able to help you stop and think and do a bit of that coaching that we all do really, really well internally, but don't necessarily take the love and support that's available. To be able to have that breathing conversation and really get you to think about where you are. You know, not being a HRD is not a career failure if you don't want to do that job. It was just a conversation that people, I think we expect to kind of want to be the most senior person in a structure, but sometimes that's not right for everybody. And I think just being able to stop and pause and think about that really honest conversation with yourself about what are you really great at, where are your strengths, where are your skills, and where would you be happy with? And a HRD might not be where you want to be. And some of the conversations that we'll come along to in a little bit, and some of the kind of thoughts I wanted to share with you at the end are around, you know, it's a challenging job. And Andy, I'm sure will absolutely agree with that. And all of your jobs are really challenging. But I think that really thinking about what it is you want, where's that intrinsic motivation, looking internally, thinking about challenging your limiting beliefs, and a recruiter can help you do that. And not only we can help you, we can connect you. That's one of the beautiful things that I love about my job, is I get to speak to amazing people like yourselves, and even more amazing people in the wider sector. And those connections and those people to be able to help you and support you is something that I think we are really good at doing at Penna. So I'll pause on that question, and I've got a little bit of a further discussion, I suppose, that I'm really interested and excited as a ex-HR BP. And it's the relationship between HR and OD, actually, Andy and Dawn. So I'm obviously working on the recruitment side now, and I'm speaking to clients who are telling me, you know, chief execs who are saying to me, this is what I need from my HR leader. And what I'm kind of hearing from not every single client that we work with, but a lot of clients is, I need a technical, strong expert that will be able to do some of that really senior, unpleasant hiring, and the really horrible side of it is that firing side, you know, and ultimately as a HRD, you've got to be skilled enough to be able to remove really senior people, and maybe even the chief exec. But it's really hard, I think, to kind of really get some technical expertise when you're in either a HR role or an OD role against the other side of the coin, because I do see them as two sides of the same coin. But obviously, if the HRD is about having that expert HR technical understanding, but also what I didn't say is the other things that clients are saying are, we want strategy, we want culture change, we want transformation. And that tends to sit, I suppose, when you're starting to look at further down the structure, Andy and Dawn, where you've got more experts in those different areas. Just wondering what your opinions are, Andy and Dawn, I suppose, around your own technical background and where you've kind of come from, and how you've maybe got some of those other side of the coin skills, and any advice that you could give to colleagues on the call who maybe are from either the HR or OD background around how they can get some of those wider skills to be able to help them progress. Dawn, I'll come to you first, if that's okay, just around kind of what you've done. And Andy, it'd be really helpful to hear that more helicopter view.
That's fine. Thanks, Rachel. So I think I've been quite fortunate that I've actually done both sides. So I've done the HR and I've done the OD as I've kind of been progressing through my career. So, you know, but I think what I would advise to other people is that if you are kind of working in one side of that coin, so to speak. So I think, let me take a step back. I think in smaller sized organizations, the likelihood is you would probably work across the whole piece because you've got less resources, you've got a smaller workforce, etc. when you move into a larger kind of council or organisation, that's where it kind of becomes a bit more fragmented. And I think what I've always done is I've always been really willing to take part in projects that don't naturally sit within my remit at the time, because that's helped me to get that exposure, to get a bit more breadth and a bit more understanding. And I can draw upon those skills and experiences when I'm going for another role. What it also does, it gives me a taste of the other side of the coin, so to speak, and to see, actually, do I enjoy it as much as I thought I would? Is it something I would like to specialise in? And then, you know, I can take that and then move to where I want to go. So that's kind of how I've approached it, you know, in terms of taking opportunities that have been given to us. I mean, they say, you know, you have at least 3 opportunities every single day in life. The problem is we don't see them as opportunities. But, you know, I've kind of been really intentional in kind of recognizing opportunities and kind of taking that chance to kind of learn something new, to stretch myself and to give me that breadth. So that's basically been my experience. I'm sure Andy will add his insight.
Dawn. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Dawn. I had a similar experience as Dawn, actually. So I guess for most of my career, I would always describe myself as a sort of a HR generalist and sort of very hands-on, very operational, you know, doing that kind of traditional hiring and firing. But now, certainly the last sort of 10, 15 years at the HR director level, I sometimes think I don't really do that much. I don't really do HR anymore, because you're doing sort of, you know, the strategy and the more OD stuff. But you're absolutely right, Rachel, is the organisation still expects you to go back to those HR traditional skills. So you can't lose them. And only a couple of weeks ago, the chief exec asked me to do one of those really unpleasant things nobody wishes to do, and you have to do it in 12 hours. And actually, I quite liked doing it because I hadn't done it for so long. So it was challenging, but it was that back to, you know, when I was more junior and learning. So you have to hold on to that broader skill set. You're absolutely right, because I think employers do demand it. And I guess, as Dawn has suggested, I think the key thing is, if you are going up the more traditional HR route, keep that technical expertise, but seek out opportunities to broaden. So one of the things I did as sort of that generalist HR person is I suppose I describe it as find a thing that you're really passionate about. So I've done some big bits of work in the wellbeing space or EDI space that are within your remit, but you want to have that tangible hold on to something that you own, that you can lead on and have a tangible impact on the organization that employs you. So you put your hand up and run it, lead it, and make it land, even though it's not part of that sort of day-to-day role that you are doing. And that's been a really powerful experience, because often if you're doing the day-to-day, sometimes at the end of the day, you think, so what have I actually done? But if you're also doing sort of a big project, a big program, a big transformation piece, then you get that broader exposure, as Dawn has said, but you've also got really good evidence of outcome. Because I always think, and I think it's healthy, but I think it's a healthy paranoia I have in my job about that output, that outcome. What have you achieved? Can you demonstrate the contribution you made to the members of staff around you? And I think that's quite a healthy thing to have. So it's always thinking a little bit about the tangible outputs. So don't just do the sort of the day-to-day, because that can sort of blend and merge. Think about that sort of passion. I think the other thing I would say too, though, is work with a team around you, because you can get quite anxious if you think you have to do everything yourself, because you don't. And I think where I've been best in my HR leadership role is when I've had really good people around you. So now in Leeds, I've got an absolutely fantastic deputy who can do lots of things I can't do. So I don't need to feel, oh my God, I have to do a bit of everything whenever I'm asked, because you can pull on people. So it is about that team around you and recognizing the bits that you're less good at, or you become a little bit de-skilled at because you don't do it every day anymore. As long as you know somebody who can help you, then you should be okay. So it's about that sort of team spirit as well.
It's great, and I think it's really valuable that you can't be the be all and end all. You can't know everything, and I suppose that from a leadership perspective, kind of moving the HR piece to one side, developing people who maybe are more brilliant than you are, to be able to step into that space. Certainly something that my line manager talks to me about around that kind of leadership role, and giving the mantle over, I suppose, in terms of that control or that ability to help develop people. It must be a challenge for HRDs in that space, actually, Andy, around your chief is expecting you to have it all at your fingertips, but the reality is it's quite impossible to do that.
Yeah.
And you've got to trust in your people.
Yeah, you do. And I think you said something really important earlier, Rachel, just about individuals knowing whether or not they want to move to the step upwards or not. So I mentioned my fantastic deputy, and she's very clear she doesn't want to do my role. I mean, she could do it really well, but she doesn't like the kind of the strategy and the vision and having to go and talk to politicians about stuff, or standing in front of a room and talking about, here's your next 5-year strategy. She'd much rather just crack on and do stuff today, make the hard decision, and then move on. So it's about what you want and the ways of working that you want. And I think it's just being comfortable saying, yeah, I don't want to do that job, but I'm quite happy in this job. And then you are right. I guess part of my role is then getting people slotting around you who have got that skill mix and skill blend.
Yeah. Great, thank you. And I suppose just thinking about going back to that kind of two sides of the same coin, apprenticeship levies. If you're an OD professional, you can get the CIPD badge and do the qualification through the apprenticeship levy if that's something that you can push if you haven't got that. Because I think there is an element of that opened a lot of doors for me in terms of the theoretical piece, because I was not ready for a HRBP from a technical perspective. I think I kind of landed in a very different journey, and I got the badge as I became the strategic HRBP, which now allowed me to solidify. But 70, 20, 10. 10% of that came from that badge of having that CIPD, which was amazing. But actually, I got a heck of a lot of battle scars and amazing achievements from doing it on the job and asking for those opportunities. I'm thinking, I suppose, more broadly about some of the challenges facing public sector HR professionals in the future. Just thinking, I want to just spend a couple of minutes reflecting on what are those. And obviously, we're in a really political unrest time in terms of general and local elections, the kind of coming on board of combined authorities with elected mayors in that space, but also a general election looming. And that you mentioned a little bit, Andy, about that. Your deputy doesn't love being in that political space and doesn't want to do that. But I suppose that's maybe a really difficult place for HR&D to be in, and kind of is potentially going to get more challenging as we move through the next sort of 5 years or so. So just thinking on that theme, and it might be something that you've reflected on. What else do you think is going to be really challenging? So aspiring HRDs or aspiring HR head of services need to be thinking about in terms of their exposure and development now for the next 5 years.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think you're right about the next 5 years, certainly a lot of uncertainty. So I think we can assume, particularly in local government, we'll have to all think about doing more with less again. I know we're familiar with territory with all of us anyway, but I think that journey will continue. So I guess it's thinking about how do we innovate and be creative with the workforce. So I guess issues there about our skills in job design or job redesign, organizational restructure. I think the skills agenda will be a big issue. Do more with less. I think the answer might be in terms of digitalization, and us as HR professionals and leaders being comfortable with the digital agenda. I think for me also a big issue or a big challenge over the next 5 years is about the role our managers and leaders have to play. So certainly in Leeds, we've got about 2,500 managers, and in my mind, their capability and their confidence is probably the most important thing in terms of the success of the organisation. So it's not really me that does the HR. They're the ones that are doing the people management and people leadership. But my task is ensuring that their capability and confidence is right for the next 5 years. So big piece there about that. And I guess sort of final thing maybe in my mind about the next 5 years, and we have touched on this a bit, is just think about the demographic changes perhaps. So we tend to think a little bit, I talked earlier about sort of job purpose. So we often think about jobs in terms of, what a job is or how a job is run. But maybe as HR leaders, we need to think about why a job is, because I think certainly people entering the labour market in the next 5 years may be asking more about the why and the purpose and the values, rather than, you know, the more traditional, you know, job description, describe the job, describe the, you know, the you know, salary. They're thinking much more sort of broader. So I think how we pivot some of that will be key to me as well.
Great, thank you, Andy. Dawn, any additional reflections or opposite of reflections, I suppose, around what's in store for the next 5 years?
Yeah, so I echo everything that Andy has said, totally agree with that. I think also the other thing we need to give consideration to is a lot of local authorities have an ageing workforce, but increasingly we're going to get more multi-generational workforces, and different people want different things from work. So it's how do we manage that? How do we make, it touches on what Andy said to a degree, how do we make roles interesting and people actually want to stay and work with us? And I think the other thing is we're going to have to, whether we like it or not, tap into AI a lot more, because we are going to have to do more with less. If we put that on our resources in terms of our staff, they're going to start suffering from burnout. People are going to be demotivated and all the other things that come with it. So I think we're going to have to look at how do we tap into AI more? How can we kind of use that to, you know, streamline processes, help to bolster our resources, etc. So they're the only other things that I would add, Rachel.
That's great. Thank you, Dawn. And just like to, before I kind of come on to a sort of last reflection from the two of you before I close up, if there's anybody that would like to ask a question, please feel free to pop it in the chat and we'll do our best to try and get around to it in the next few minutes. So please do that. Andy, reflections or Andy's top tips for people on the call or people watching at home, in terms of, you know, what would you say to that from this webinar that really solidifies helping somebody on their journey?
Gosh, yeah. So a few things from me. I guess the first thing is probably the confidence, your own confidence. So you trust your judgment, you know, you're HR experts. So trust in that, and be confident about your knowledge, your skills, and share it. Too often I see HR people are too risk averse. So I think have that bias for action, take a judgment, and you know, go for it. So confidence. I think Dawn talked about curiosity. Put your hand up and ask the questions and get involved in other stuff outside of your own world, whatever that may be. I think it's key. They all sound like they begin with C, but my other C is connections. And I think, Rachel, you talked about this, is that build the network, build the connections, and not just within HR. You know, look across, build connections with your finance colleagues, your IT colleagues, your marketing colleagues, your service delivery people, but also outside your organisation. You know, we talked about PPMA, obviously, but CIPD, other networks. It really, really is very important that. So, yeah, confidence, curiosity, and connections from me.
Beautifully summarised, Andy. Thank you. And to you, Dawn, any final reflections?
Final reflections ties in a bit with what Andy said, but one thing I want to touch on is confidence, and kind of we all have those voices, you know, those limiting beliefs, and we kind of think, oh, can I do it? Can I not? I don't think it's for me, etc. So imposter syndrome is very real, and I think there's something about quieting those voices. As Andy said, believe in your abilities. You haven't got to whatever stage you're at just by chance. You've worked hard, you do know your stuff. In a lot of instances, you may be the subject matter expert. So that self-belief is so important. And I think it's about kind of tapping into your networks as well, coming into, you know, webinars such as this, looking at things on LinkedIn, seeing what other people are doing, reaching out to people and having those conversations. I will say for that though, sometimes you might reach out to somebody, say for example on LinkedIn, and you might get total tumbleweed. They don't reply and what have you. If you already have a lack of confidence or limiting beliefs, you might take it personally. Try not to do it. Easier said than done. Been there myself. but try not to do it. It's not about you. Sometimes people are just really busy. So I think, you know, if you do, you made a really valid point, Rachel, not everybody wants to get to that top job in HR. I know that I didn't, that was never my plan. But if you do, you know, reach out to networks. There's always going to be a friendly face, a friendly voice, the search firms such as Penna and others, and just have those conversations. Networking is absolutely key. And if you can find, you know, sponsors, somebody, your manager, somebody that you work with and get on well, who can talk about you and advocate for you in spaces where you can't actually enter right now, that is really important as well. But self-belief and that inner confidence, that confidence is so important.
Thanks, Dawn. And I've got like goosebumps now. I think it's just in terms of the excitement of what you guys are going to do on this call. You know, you are absolutely the future, and I think that real honesty of limiting beliefs, don't worry about it. You know, put your nose in places that you think they might not be welcome, because I bet you've got something really, really positive to say. And Dava in the chat has said, surround yourself with people who make you happy, laugh and aim for more, block that imposter. Get rid of it living rent-free in your head. Fantastic. So I haven't got any more questions in the chat, so I just wanted to, I suppose, round off to say thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to hand to Marie in a second. That's probably going to just finish it off from a PPMA perspective. But thank you especially to Andy and Dawn, who have joined me and Matt on this journey of kind of uncovering. I'm pretty confident it won't be the last we talk from a Penna perspective about aspirant HRDs, and there are some amazing programs that I'll touch on in a moment. But just wanted to reflect, the CIPD have also done some work on this, and obviously they're our professional body, they're my professional body. I'm still a CIPD member. So have a bit of a Google around aspirant HRD programs. They did some research recently, I think in the last couple of years, and they actually surveyed HR directors and said, what would you wanted to have known before you took on the job? And they came back with 14 themes. So I'm not going to name all of them because we haven't got time for that, but things like, what does it mean to be a HRD legally? Because you need to think about that, I suppose, in terms of that legal piece. And then we've obviously talked about the different sides of the coin in this conversation. What really are those breadth of responsibilities? You've heard from Andy that's, you know, to say, I don't do HR too much anymore, but I've got to lean back on it when I need to do it. So thinking about that real breadth and depth of opportunities, and thinking about, you know, something that I think the webinar with the CIPD said is, could you hold your own on finances when you're in HR if the finance director can't be there? Could you talk about that? Because there are, again, two sides of a different coin, the HR and finance relationship, as I've experienced. How do you work with your peers as the HRD? Because you might be on that really horrible, ugly side of HR, having to have a conversation with a peer that's not particularly pleasant. Adding value, being strategic, less operational, that political acumen, different place, I think, for a HRD than maybe it is for a strategic BP, Andy and Dawn. And thinking about resilience, I know you've both mentioned that, you know, how do you keep yourself safe at that top level? It must be a lonely place. It certainly was for me as a strategic BP. It probably gets even lonelier the further you go up in terms of, you know, your counsel and where you get that from. So definitely would recommend you having a look at that CIPD webinar, and the CIPD also do a mentoring program for aspirant HRDs. But what we also do, obviously, as a premium sponsor with the PPMA, and the PPMA are the amazing organisation that's pulled us together today, is use the link and the networks. You know, hopefully you're all PPMA members here today. The networking, the resources online, the newsletters, the thought leadership that PPMA bring are fantastic. And let's not forget those amazing aspirant programs, of which I was a rising star. I didn't win, but I was on this program in 2015. There's people on the call, Marie, Dawn, who have been on that Peer into the Future program. I mean, there's some amazing programs available for support. So use it. And, you know, in the uncertain times, in times of real challenges for the public sector, for organisations and for you HR&OD professionals, don't face it alone. Talk to people, because I guarantee other people will be going through exactly the same thought process. So Marie, I'm really sorry I've spent a little bit too long summarising, but thank you so much, and I'll hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Rachel. Thank you to all of you, Rachel, Matt, Dawn and Andy. I personally found that session extremely informative, insightful, and I'm going to be contacting lots of people on this call after today, so thank you very much. So that about brings us to the end of our session today. As I mentioned earlier, this is a series of webinars that PPMA runs, so do keep your eye on the PPMA webinar website for their list of future webinars. Really hoping to see some of you at the conference in Birmingham next week. And just in case you'd like to come to the next webinar in the series, it's on the 17th of May, and that one is on redundancy resilience for HR professionals. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us this afternoon, and look forward to seeing you at another PPMA event in the future. Take care, everyone.